Welcome to Astrotips, tips and tricks for Astroneer. Today's topic: navigation and not getting lost. My first playthrough in early access ended by getting lost. I struck out in a buggy, lost direction, and spent around 2 hours roving around trying to find way back to the base. And then gave up and started a new save. Strangely, it never occurred to me to die and respawn at the base, but there were many ways to recover without dying. Today I'll teach you how to never abandon a save. We have a lot of tricks, so strap yourselves in. First we'll cover some tools: the compass, the beacons and the starband. Then we'll talk about techniques such as best base location, artificial landmarks, navigating by compass and sky, finding your way back after getting lost on the surface, techniques for navigating caves, finding your way back after getting lost in caves, navigating uncharted planets, and finding big purples. Use the timestamps in the description to navigate the video itself. As a personal note, I like that you can get lost in this game, and that navigation is a skill. Lacking any kind of map and limiting beacon visibility creates interesting gameplay missing from other games. But this is highly subjective. Other people disagree, and that's fine. With that out of the way, let's get started. The first tool is the compass. Hover the character to see it. Note that north and south point to the poles, and you can easily travel there. Finding the poles is tremendously useful, as we'll show later in the guide. With the keyboard and mouse controls, hold the right button on the character to keep the compass visible while moving. Unfortunately, right now there is no way to see the compass while driving a vehicle, but you don't need to, because towing it with a winch is better than driving. You'll see examples later in the guide. The next tool is beacons. Beacons are crafted from quartz, which is found in caves or made in the soil centrifuge. A beacon projects a vertical beam visible from a distance. The farther away you are, the higher it appears, until a certain limit. Standing on a higher vantage point, you see them from farther away, although beacons may be obscured by clouds in the current version of the game. Setting the clouds to the experimental quality lets the beacons through, but costs a lot of frames per second, especially on the starting planet. This may change in the future versions of the game. You can use beacons as a trail of breadcrumbs while traveling. As a quick note, there are better alternatives, which we'll show in a few minutes. But here's what you need to know. Quartz doesn't occur on the surface, so make sure to bring enough. With moderately efficient placement, you'll need around 10 to 12 beacons to encircle the starting planet. I haven't measured the others. Always put beacons within sight of each other. Beware of planet curvature and extremely short horizons. You may lose sight of a beacon much sooner than you'd expect. Placing a beacon in a high place makes it visible from much farther away, but also makes it more likely to be obscured by clouds. You can raise a beacon artificially. The easiest way is by raising yourself on a pillar using the alignment mode. For oxygen, power and safety, pin a vehicle to yourself with a winch. Using more winches will make it stick closer to you, keeping you tethered. To descend safely, fall down in the vehicle. Once on the ground, immediately resave, otherwise if you reload the save, the vehicle will be stuck in the air. Also see the Astrotips guides on the alignment mode and movement, links in the video description. Beacons are obscured by terrain and clouds. The experimental clouds don't obscure beacons and landing spots, but significantly reduce the FPS, especially on the starting planet. This may change in the future versions of the game. Whether a beacon is obscured by clouds depends on your vantage point. It happens even to beacons on the ground level with no elevation. All that said, I don't recommend beacon trails. You can navigate just fine by compass and sky, as we'll show in a few minutes. You don't need to beacon the purples. The only purple you need to return to is the one closest to your base. On the starting planet, that's typically the North Pole, and the compass will get you there. Beacons can disambiguate landing spots. When taking off from a planet, you can leave a landing pad with a beacon to mark the place to return to. Without a beacon, you couldn't tell it apart from the other landing spots. In conclusion, beacons have their uses, but you don't need them as breadcrumbs. This will become apparent later in the guide. One surprising tool is the star band. It's the belt around the sky, kinda like the Milky Way in our real sky. Unlike the Milky Way, it matches the orbital plane of the entire solar system. It also happens to match the rotational plane of every planet, which is very convenient for navigation, as we are about to show. As a side note, looking at a planet from the orbit, the North Pole is on the right, the South Pole is on the left, and the equator is straight. This is useful for navigation, for picking landing spots, and for picking a good base location. On a pole, the star band is horizontal, encircling the horizon. Since the sun moves along the belt, it never really sets, although it may be obscured by hills. That's convenient for solar power, although this is out of scope for this video. On the equator, the star band is vertical and goes between west and east. Following the band will keep you on the equator, which is convenient for finding big purples. We'll cover this later in the guide. Between a pole and the equator, the star band is slanted. The direction where it dips below the horizon is the closer pole, in this case north. The direction where it's above the horizon is the farther pole, in this case south, so you can always tell which hemisphere you're in. Its angle corresponds to your latitude, the distance from the equator, measured in degrees. When halfway from the equator, the star band is angled 45 degrees, so you can always tell how far you are from the equator and the nearest pole. That's the basics, we'll get back to the star band. Side note on base location. When starting a new game, the world is generated randomly. The base always spawns in the northern hemisphere at a random latitude, a random distance from the equator. Ideally, you should restart several times until you start within oxygen distance from the North Pole. At that distance, you can see the big purple on the pole from the base, and you can see the base beacon from the pole, which allows you to get around by compass, greatly simplifying navigation. Since world generation is random, getting a good starting save can take a lot of time. So a faster way, at least on PC, is to get it from someone else. Some people make backups of good starting saves. Feel free to ask me or ask around in the official Astroneer Discord. You can also move the base to the pole. There are many reasons which will become apparent later in the guide. While traveling, you can make your own landmarks instead of relying on nature or beacons. The simplest way is raising pillars using the alignment mod. This is arguably more practical than beacons because you don't need quartz. But you have to place them much more frequently due to the limited render distance. Beacons render infinitely far away and can only be obscured by terrain or clouds, but artificial landmarks fade away before they get obscured by the horizon. The render distance depends on the object thickness and graphics settings. It varies between systems and may change in the future patches. So keep your landmarks reasonably close to each other to ensure they work for anyone joining your game and keep working in the future. The render distance of a pillar seems to depend mostly on its width, not the height or the overall volume. The wide mode slightly increases its render distance, but not by much. You get enough height by just raising it with the alignment mode while standing on the ground. Just aim at the ground next to you and hold the button until it stops. More height doesn't seem to help. If you do decide to go higher, raise the pillar under yourself. For power and oxygen, pin a rubber platform or shuttle to yourself with a winch. To descend safely, enter a rubber seat and let it fall down, but make sure to disengage the winches first, or it will fly off in a random direction, possibly into space. Resave after falling down, otherwise the vehicle may be stuck in the air when you reload. Note that this doesn't seem to actually increase the render distance. High pillars are useful as elevators, not landmarks. All that said, I don't recommend landmarks, just as I don't recommend beacon trails. It can be fun, but you can navigate just fine by compass and sky, as we're about to show. Compass and sky navigation. This is the real technique. It lets you travel comfortably in any direction without breadcrumbs and easy to return home. The first thing to know is your hemisphere and latitude. In the current version of the game, the first base always starts in the northern hemisphere at a random distance from the pole. This may change in the future patches, but for simplicity this guide assumes north. If close enough, from the base you can see the beam shooting into the sky at the North Pole. Conversely, from the pole, you can see the base beacon. Now, if they are farther away, you probably need a single beacon to connect the base and the pole. To return to the starting base, simply go north, then look for the base beacon. It's that simple. When going around the planet, the starband always tells you the hemisphere and the latitude. The way back is always north. It's impossible to get lost. That's why you don't need breadcrumbs. Later in the guide, we'll use the compass and the sky to find big purples. See the timestamp in the video description. All the same principles apply to other planets, with the difference that you pick the starting location, and you should definitely pick a pole. As a side note, the moons don't have purples at the poles, but this doesn't matter for navigation. Let's say we did get lost. How do we get back? First of all, go to the North Pole. If the base beacon is visible from there, we are done. Otherwise, you have a few options. Raise a pillar to see farther. An alignment mode makes it much easier, but is not necessary. If this reveals the base beacon, you're done. To descend safely, carefully trim the pillar from the top. You can try going in random directions. Watch the starband and don't exceed around 45 degrees. If you don't see the base beacon from there, return to the pole and try another direction. You can also ask someone else to join your game and fly a shuttle into orbit. They can see all the beacons, including the base and you, and give you compass directions. Note that the North Pole is on the right and the South Pole is on the left when looking from the orbit. The final option is to die and respawn. If you don't have anything worth recovering, replacing the gear can be faster than going back. But the poles help us once again. Die at a pole, and it's easy to find the corpse and recover the equipment. And this time leave a beacon on the way to go back from the pole. Let's talk about cave navigation. The game teaches you to use tethers. They provide oxygen, power, and navigation. They act as a learning tool and a safeguard. But tethers encourage you to move on foot without a vehicle, and that's the main problem. The main reason to go anywhere is for resources, but gathering them on foot is too slow, your inventory is too small. You want vehicles, large ones too. A vehicle already provides oxygen and power, so all you need is to learn how to traverse rough terrain and not get lost. Now, normally going through caves on a rover is hard, but there are tricks to make it easy. We've covered this in detail in the Astrotips movement guide, and tunnel digging is explained in the Astrotips core diving guide. Links to both videos are in the description. For this one, we'll just focus on not getting lost in caves. Normally, I don't recommend using the compass in caves. The distances are too small, and there are way too many sharp turns. You end up losing direction and getting lost anyway. But there is one exception: entrance at a pole. If the cave entrance is at the north or south pole, you can get back simply by following the compass, which is yet another advantage of a pole base. A very nice technique for leaving breadcrumbs in caves is trail painting. One of the functions of the inhibitor mod is changing the terrain type without changing its structure. This is usually called painting. It's done by using the raise function, which normally creates new terrain. In caves, paint your path to leave a trail leading back to the entrance. This way you can never get lost. As an added bonus, in addition to painting, the inhibitor mod instantly clears gravel, stalagmites and other obstacles, and happens to be great for resource gathering, making gathering faster and avoiding terrain damage. So I recommend carrying it at all times. Check the Astrotips inhibitor mod guide for more tips, link in the video description. One extravagant, decadent approach that makes caves really easy is to simply excavate around the entrance. Obliterate the walls and low ceilings, flattening the floors. This makes it easier to use a rover and reveals resources hiding in the walls and ceilings. In addition, it provides great amounts of soil for the centrifuge and construction. Note that you can reach resources on the high walls and ceilings by raising yourself on a pillar. The alignment mode helps, but is optional. The alignment mode also helps to keep the floors horizontal if you fumble them up. This looks slow, but saves you from getting lost in a maze and dying, which costs a lot of time. As the proverb says, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. A key thing about caves is that you don't need to travel far. You won't find anything new and different there. Going deeper does change the resource distribution, but traveling wide does not. The resources only found in caves you don't need in large quantities. The wrecks don't have anything valuable either. So unless you just want to explore, a sweep around the entrance gives you enough resources and a lot of soil while avoiding any navigation difficulties. Let's say we did get lost in a cave. How to get back? This assumes that your entrance is not at a pole and you don't have a trail, otherwise you wouldn't have gotten lost. One way out is to build a rod up. Unfortunately, we can't simply drill up on a rover. Terrain is extremely cavernous and you'll just fall back down. You'll have to build the rod on foot. Having a winch and a packager is extremely helpful. Most of the time, it's enough to pin the winch to yourself, but in large caverns where the rover easily falls off the rod, pin it to a packager which can stick to walls, ceilings and rods. Ideally, don't bring a rover into deep caves without both of those. In principle, you can break the rover with bumps in the rod, but this is way too unreliable. Mishaps will cost a lot of time. Start the rod by picking a good angle. You want it slanted on the main axis, but not on the cross axis. There is an alignment mod trick for getting good angles. We've covered this in the Astrotips core diving guide. After picking the angle, use the flattening function and move it forward. With a wide mod, you don't need to swing the terrain tool left and right. Simply hold the button and move it forward. It will dig a tunnel large enough for a large rover. But in such a tight space, it's easy to misclick and disengage the winch. To avoid this, maintain a high ceiling. Simply aim at the low ceiling and let the tool move forward. Continue until the surface. Once out, use the surface navigation tricks covered earlier in the guide to travel home. As a bonus, the rod may be helpful for future trips. Check the Astrotips core diving guide for more advice on digging tunnels. Link in the video description. Alternatively, you can raise yourself on a pillar, making a vertical shaft. This requires the alignment mode for the pillar and a winch for the rover. Compared to the rod version, it's harder to do, riskier, and doesn't leave a nice rod, but it does leave a vertical shaft. It's easy to accidentally damage the pillar or disengage the winches, and very hard to recover. It took me 3 attempts to record this footage, and that's only 1/3 of the way deep into the planet, so I don't recommend this unless you have good reasons to want a vertical shaft specifically. I'm including this just to give people ideas. Be very careful with your aim. Never brush the terrain tool near the pillar, and never click anywhere near the winch pins. Take it slow, aim carefully, and don't fiddle around. As with the rod, once you're out, use the surface navigation tweaks to get back. When making an exploration or resource trip to another planet, it's easy to run or drive too far and lose sight of the shuttle. You can minimize this by landing close to a pole, but it's even better to just take the shuttle with you. Now, taking a shuttle onto a rover isn't practical, but you don't need to. You can move a shuttle by juggling it. We've detailed this technique in the Astrotips movement guide, a link in the video description, so check it out. Once you get a winch, the game changes. Use it to tow the shuttle and move at full speed. This eliminates the need for rovers on short trips, particularly for resource gathering. The large shuttle is the only vehicle you need. Even on your home planet, it may be better than rovers, because it quickly takes you far away and quickly takes you back. As an added bonus, if you die, you respawn right at the shuttle. Be aware that this only works on planets without a shelter, which seems to take priority over a shuttle. Also, be aware of bombers on Glacier and Atrox. They can explode your vehicle. Fortunately, you can simply reload the save when that happens. Big purples, the mysterious alien-looking structures. How do we find them? They always spawn in fixed locations. There are 6 on every planet and 2 on every moon. On the planets, 1 spawns at every pole and 4 at the equator, evenly spread out. This makes them easy to find by compass and the star band. On the moons, they spawn at the equator opposite each other, very easy to see from orbit. On a planet, start at one of the poles. You can often find a landing spot close to a pole. 1 purple is right there. After activating it, pick a random direction and go straight to the equator. Watch the star band. It's vertical at the equator, so you know when you're there. Randomly pick west or east and circumnavigate the planet, activating 4 purples along the way. Stay on the equator by keeping the starband vertical, otherwise you might miss a purple. When done, check the compass and go to the other pole, which has the remaining purple. On a moon, it's easy to see both purples from the orbit. You can often land close to them or just travel the equator as described before. Minor spoiler warning. If you don't want to learn about purples, pause now and skip to the outro using the timestamp in the video description. After activating a purple, you can gaze into the old stone. How to interpret it? It's the map of all purples on the planet, dubbed nodes. The map orientation is similar to the planet's orientation from orbit. Close bottom right is north, far top left is south. The other nodes are along the equator. Origin means current location. Elevation level is misleading. It's actually simply the numerical index of each node, nothing more. Bright nodes are the ones you have activated. Dim nodes are yet to be activated. When teleporting, you are briefly rotated in a certain direction. This direction is misleading and doesn't match where you are actually going, which could be straight down. Just keep this in mind. At some point this caused me to wander for a while, because I assumed the direction wasn't meaningless. That's all for today. I hope what you've learned saves you time. If you like it, check out the other Astrotips videos and subscribe for more. If you want to help the channel grow, drop a like and share it with fellow Astroneers. I'm thinking about changing the format. The current format, where I cram everything I know on a topic into one guide, makes guides extremely time intensive to make, and I can't go back and add to the video without outright remaking it. So I'm thinking of trying a daily tip format where I post every tip as a short video on its own, and combine them into a playlist to make an always growing guide. Let me know what you think about that, and see you around!